So let's talk about lesson plans, because every teacher needs one. I know that some teachers come in and they seem like they teach the whole thing, just making up it as they go. But if the class felt good on your body, they did not make that up as they went. They at least thought through like the theme or a couple of key combinations. Nobody can teach a really excellent class completely making it up as they go. One of the mistakes that I made in my earliest teaching was that I thought good teachers just made it up as they went. And so I did. And I look back on it now, and those were very clunky classes. I wasn't using my time efficiently. There wasn't continuity for the students. The kids came to the class because they had to come to the class. I was a ballet teacher at a competition studio and they had to come. But it wasn't fun. It didn't feel good physically because they weren't appropriately warmed up and prepared and had practiced things by the time we got to Grand Allegro. It didn't feel good mentally because I was all over the place. It just wasn't the way to do it. But once I figured out that I need a lesson plan, the next mistake that I made, we're just gonna learn how not to do this. The next mistake that I made was still thinking that good teachers just had it all in their head. And so I would plan stuff out, but I don't have the kind of head that can hang on to that. Like, I am not the one that can remember choreography. When I was a professional dancer, after rehearsals, I would have to go out in the hall and open up a notebook and write everything down. And I would have to go home. I had to practice it that day. If I was rehearsing the same thing the next day, I had to practice it before I left my house. Like, I just am not good at remembering choreography the first time. It doesn't mean I can't be a good dancer, but it means I have to do work outside of the studio that other people don't see. And that is the same for my teaching. So for me, it's not enough to think about what I want to do before I come into the room. I need to write it down. I need to have a notebook. So I learned that I need to plan. And I learned that I need to write down my plans. And then the next mistake that I made was that my lesson plans weren't focused. I had a plan, I knew what I was doing, but I didn't pick like a reason we were in class that day. So the first thing I put at the top are the objectives for the day. And because I teach ballet, that ends up being the vocabulary that we're going to learn. And I just listed out at the top. And then I planned the class, like pliés through reverence. And my classes got better. The kids got better faster, mostly because I was paying attention to the order that I was teaching things in. It wasn't like, oh, you haven't done this yet, let's toss it in. Like, there was a method to the madness. And if you don't have a syllabus that gives you the method, it can be really, really overwhelming. You know, just do the best you can. You can buy them. You can definitely buy a syllabus. You can definitely buy training that will include a syllabus. Or, you know, we do the best we can. If you start writing down your objectives this year, you can review them at the end of the year and kind of fiddle with the order that you want to do things in next year. Even if you have purchased a syllabus from someone, that's really a good idea because their studio and your situation are not the same. If you got a syllabus from a ballet studio and you are at a competition studio, you're going to need to make some adjustments. If you got a syllabus from a studio that's based in a large metropolitan area, that clientele, like the expectations that the families come to the studio with are very different than the expectations that families come to like more rural studios with, and you need to make adjustments for that. And I don't mean like water down the ballet. There's amazing ballet in all kinds of small towns everywhere. There is a competitiveness or a sense of urgency in larger cities that smaller cities don't usually have. And so that in terms of dance training, that usually means that families in larger cities are willing to spend more hours a day and more days of the week in training, Whereas in smaller towns, it's really common for families to say, my kid is 7, you can see them once a week, maybe twice a week. That's a very, very common thing. And so if you have a syllabus that was planning on seeing the 7-year-olds 4 days a week, you are going to need to make adjustments. And the best way to know how to adjust for your studio is to keep track of what you did and then review at the end of the year. So that approach got me pretty far in my teaching. Like, I knew that I needed to have a lesson plan. I knew that I needed to write it down, and I knew that I needed to include objectives, and I needed to be self-evaluating throughout the year, but especially at the end of the year so that I could do better the next year. That got me pretty far. Then I got the wonderful advice to plan my Grand Allegro first. If you are not a ballet teacher and you're thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me, I don't do Grand Allegro, you have a grand finale. You like how I call it a grand finale, but a Grand Allegro? That's great. Just notice that. Okay, so, but whatever style of dance you teach, you have like a fun thing that you do at the end. And it usually is a big jump because we're nice and warmed up, and jumping feels good for a lot of people, especially young people. If you're teaching an over 45 class, it's going to look different, but there aren't very many of those around. But that's when the kids feel danciest, when they're flying through the air and they're twirling and they're hitting an air, they're doing an arabesque, and you're like, it's a thing. But it feels good, and so it's the last thing that we do usually. So whatever your grand finale or Grand Allegro is, plan it first. This was great advice. Grand Allegro gives you this structure because it's a chain of steps that you have linked together. So you need to make sure that you have either done all of those steps or you have done the components of that step. So like if you are doing temps levés and arabesque as part of your Grand Allegro, have you done temps levés? Like, have your kids hopped on one foot already that day? Have you done an arabesque? You don't necessarily need to do temps levés and arabesque 3 times, but you need to make sure that they have done the components. But that's what I mean by Grand Allegro gives you this structure. There's a lot of elements in your Grand Allegro, and you get to go back and make sure that you hit all of those elements. So by the time you have combined the information from your Grand Allegro with your objectives for the day, a lot of the, what should I do, answers itself. You should do the components of your Grand Allegro. You should do your vocabulary, and then see what's left, and the spaces that are left, those are just other chances to work on your Grand Allegro and your vocabulary. So I started implementing this advice. I still would write my objectives at the top of the page, and then I would like hit enter a couple times, give myself some space, because it has to match. I have to, I'm a visual person. So here I am, right? Objectives, space, 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 space. And then I would write my Grand Allegro. And then I would go backwards, like literally backwards. Grand Allegro, and then the medium jumps, and then the small jumps, and then the pirouette, and then the adagio, work my way back up. That way, the class kind of felt like it was building to this thing, because it was. My students felt better in their dancing because it was building into this thing, and it made sense physically, it made sense mentally. It's like the cherry on the top of the ice cream, like you do all of this work, which is awesome and we love it, and it's the ice cream, and then you stick the Grand Allegro on top and it's like, ta-da! Look at how all of these awesome things come together. Look at how all of my work paid off. So by this point, my teaching had gotten much better. I knew that I needed a plan. I knew that I personally needed to write it down, bring the notes into class, and to refer to them occasionally. I knew that I needed to state my objectives for myself, and I knew that I needed to have a Grand Allegro, and then between those two things, fill in the gap. I learned all of those points before I ever was handed a syllabus by anyone. It is super, 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 super common to not get a syllabus from the studio that you're teaching at. So if you're in the same boat, I feel you. And it is really common for people to say, I trust you. And then you're like, okay, well, that's great. But so that's where I was. Just to review. I knew I needed to plan. I knew I needed to write it down. I knew I needed to be clear on my vocabulary and objectives for the day. I knew I needed to start with my Grand Allegro. So now let's get into the mistake that I made more than once. I got this advice so many times from people that I knew were excellent teachers. It's not even advice, it's a direction. 30% of your class should be spent jumping. That means if you are teaching an hour-long class, 20 minutes of your class should be spent jumping. Did you hear that? If you are teaching an hour-long class, 20 minutes of it should be jumping. And I had a hard time with that because if 20 minutes is jumping, and then we still have like adagio and pirouette and chaîné and balance, whatever that we need to get, like, what do we do with bar? Like, I love bar. Bar is a very meditative and centering time for me, and it always has been. But to think about condensing it, I really, really resisted. That was my mistake. So there's a couple of mind shifts that helped me with that. The first one is I started doing bar at home. I either would take an adult class in the morning or I would give myself a bar at home. And that way my emotional needs were met. The other thing that I did was I started thinking about bar the way that you think about feeding a toddler. So when you are raising a teeny tiny human and they have these teeny tiny stomachs and impressive mood swings, you know, if you look at like what did they eat today, you're gonna stress yourself out because it's not gonna be like the little food pyramid is not gonna be happy. If you look at what they ate over the week, then you're like, oh, we're good. They're healthy, they're happy, yay. I started looking at my bar that way. Like in the course of one day, did we get every single thing in? Nope. But over the course of, depending on how often I saw the kids, depending like over the course of the week or the course of the month, did we get all of the things in often enough that we were making progress? And the answer to that is yes. You can make progress without doing everything every day. But those were my two hangups. My love of bar and my lack of skill around how to prioritize bar so that we were getting everything in. Those two hangups were really preventing me from doing 30 minutes of jumping. Then I did a flexibility certification that I love. One of the things I learned there were the physiological reasons it's best to end your class with stretching. And I happened to be at a studio where the kids were really tight. And because I didn't trust the people that I wish I had trusted, I cut the Allegro time for more time stretching. And I had those kids for a year before I got any feedback on them. And then like the first thing I heard from the teacher they had over the summer was, why are these kids so weak? That's the reason you need to do Grand Allegro. Like, I know I said it's fun and it's like the cherry on top, and it is. That's the part that your students will remember is how good it felt. But the small jumps and the medium jumps and the big jumps, when you add them all together, that's where the kids get strongest. Bar is not where we get strongest. It's a good place to work on alignment. It's a good place to introduce new ideas. It's a good place to refine placement. But a releve at the bar is never, ever going to strengthen as much as a jump in the center. A releve is not a jump, first of all. Like, it takes a lot of strength to get to a high 3/4 point. It takes even more strength to get off the ground. It takes a lot of strength to stand correctly placed at the bar, but you still have that bar there just in case you, like, you know. When you're in the center, it's just you and your core strength. So you get a lot of feedback about it too. Nothing prepares dancers to dance the way that Allegro does, the jumping section of your class. I really wish I had listened to that advice earlier, like way earlier. But we're all works in progress. Here we are. After that summer where I realized, oh, like their bar vocabulary exactly where they thought it would be. their pirouettes, their turning ability, their adagio ability, exactly where it was expected to be. Their ability to do variations, no. 30% of your class should be jumping. No matter how weird that feels, just try it. Just try it for 3 months. That is only 12 weeks. You can do anything for 12 weeks. Just try it and see what a difference it makes. So that's where I was next, right? I need a plan. I need to write down my plan. I need objectives at the top of my plan. I need to start with my Grande Allegro and work backwards. I need to spend 30% of my class jumping. That's the step-by-step process that I go through to plan my classes. I do it for every class. The other thing that I probably started doing it during lockdown, but I started rotating through the classes that I teach and the classes that I'm like going to teach them. So like if I'm teaching like a level 2, a level 3, a level 5, and a level 6, like on Monday, I'll do the class that level 2 is doing. And on Tuesday, I'll do the class that level 3 is, like, so that I am doing what I'm going to teach. And that way, that really helps my memory. As I mentioned, I'm not the best at remembering combinations, but now that I've started doing the combinations at home sometime in the recent past, I can look at my lesson plan and just kind of glance at it and be like, oh, yep, here we go. In fact, at this point, I can usually glance at it and remember like the next 3 exercises. So I'm not like staring at this paper all the time, like spending 5% of my class time reading my own notes. So that's kind of my evolution as a teacher, like where I started as a teacher and my lesson planning abilities and where I've gotten. I do have a little write-up that goes a little bit more in detail about how I prioritize and stuff like that. I'm hoping to get my website set up to a point where I can send out monthly emails, like monthly newsletters, and this would be one of them, but I'm not there yet. So if you would like a copy of that PDF, it's 2 pages and it includes pictures, so it's less wordy than this video. If you would like a copy of that PDF, just email me, Chelsea, CHELSEA, @geekyballerina.com. I would be so happy to send that to you. I would love to share with you what I've learned so that you don't have to learn it the hard way.